Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Manalytics versus Analytics. Today we will be going over the Lions to go 0-17. Should you place the bet? We'll be going over the NBA's new free throw rule and how that is affecting the betting markets. And finally, we're going to talk about the Chiefs, tough remaining strength of schedule, and how we see that playing out. So to jump right in, we'll start with the Lions. So one of the cool things that we've come across since our last podcast, when we talked pretty in depth about futures and futures education, is a prop floating around that is Lions to go 0-17. And you see it anywhere from right now about plus 450 to plus 600. And we wanted to go into, kind of why we feel like this could be a dangerous bet for some people, because there's some alternatives for you to maybe make a little bit more money if you played a little smarter. So what we did was we looked at the look ahead lines for the Lions remaining schedule. They have a bye week 9, so week 10 on. And essentially we did, what if you bet on the opposing team on the money line? So obviously if the Lions are to go 0-17, the other team is winning each game. Mm-hmm. You bet that every single time and you reinvest your winnings each time. So let's say you bet a $10 bet, you win, you get $2, right? Because the other team's a massive favorite. You take that $2, you add it to your $10, and you bet $12 on the next game. So we ran the numbers on that, and it looks like that you can make a lot more money, or at least a decent amount more money, doing this version. You make about, we have it around $75, rather than, if you are getting the best of it, plus 600, you bet $10, you make $60. So Matt, if you want to go into a little bit about, what kind you've seen from the numbers on that.
Yeah, that's not surprising. It's not surprising on two fronts. The first of which is, we covered on our last podcast that VIG for futures bets is a lot higher than traditional bets. So if you were to go into the futures market and just place an outright bet that the Lions are going to lose all of their next games, what's the line you see? It's about 500. Plus 500, plus 500 for
but
that.
You could maybe find plus 600. Most of them are anywhere from about plus 450, plus 600. So shout out to line shopping.
Take any of the numbers, and it's still less than what you would get from individually placing these bets. You would see about a plus 750 payout from the individual bets of these. So first and foremost, it makes more sense to place the individual bets because the sportsbooks takes less VIG on individual bets than they do on futures bets. And that comes back to the fact, again, that there's a lot more uncertainty with futures bets, and it makes sense for them to add some more VIG to it. The other component is this reinvestment that you were talking about. So this is a pretty interesting topic, because if you're under the assumption that the Lions are going to lose all of their next games, and that's a bold assumption because right now, based on the odds, it's only about a 12% probability that occurs. But if you're under that assumption, you could place these individual bets and get your payout that night after each game. You can use that profit to then, again, reinvest. So on that front as well, it makes a lot more sense to do this individually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jared, you have any thoughts on that and pretty much what you think about the Lions and their chances of accomplishing that feat?
So, I guess the first thing I got to say,
accomplishing the right word.
Yeah, I don't know if that's an accomplishment. I'll say the first thing is first. The Lions as an organization, they're just shit. Like, they got to get it all the way together. So, ironically enough, in history of winless teams in the NFL, so prior to the merger, before the AFL and the NFL merged together, there were two teams that went 0-4 for the entire season. It was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Baltimore Colts. Post-merger, it's only been the Detroit Lions who went 0-16. Everybody remembers that year. And then the year after, and then in 2017, it was the Cleveland Browns who also went 0-16. So the Lions would literally be historically the third team. Historically, it's only happened 3 times in this era. It's only happened 3 times in this era, and the Lions have done it twice. Maybe that's impressive. Maybe that is accomplishment.
It's a little impressive.
It's a little impressive.
Hey, they're halfway there.
They're halfway there. So I'm ultimately looking through their schedule the rest of the way. So the rest of the way, I think they're on a bye. They're going to bye this week, and then the rest of the way, it's the Steelers, the Browns, the Bears, Vikings, Broncos, Cardinals. So those are the next few from the 14th, from November 14th to December 19th. They're not winning any of these games. I feel really terrible because I'll be honest. I think their coach, I think he's a good guy. I think Dan Campbell's a good coach. I think he's trying his best to lead this team to victory.
I could do that too,
but At the same right, but at the same time, I can go out there and coach what they're doing because it doesn't result into wins. And ultimately, I don't think the Lions is going out there to lose games. And I don't think they went into this season with the mindset of just try to be good enough.
Right.
I think Dan Campbell came with this mentality like, oh, we're going to try to win these games. But my other part is, you know how I really feel like this thing is going to happen? Because Vegas don't even have no faith in the Lions. I look at something like this. I look at something like this, and you know, to go winless, that's such a feat that for the Lions to be between 450 and 600, like that, I would expect something like that to be in the 3000s and the beyond. And Vegas is at a point where they're like almost guaranteed. Like we feel like this is a good bet because, I mean, you look at the Broncos, you look at the Browns, you look at the Cardinals. I mean, where do you see them winning the game? Ultimately, they're going to have to pull whatever. If they do win a game, it's going to be like one of those anomaly games. Just like Mike White coming in for Zach Wilson and lighting up the Bengals and nobody sees it coming because the Bengals and the Jets are not even on the same stratosphere in the trajectory of where those teams could be going this season, postseason wise. So it'll be the biggest upset of this. If the Lions win a game, God willing, if the Lions win a game, it'll probably be the biggest upset of the NFL,
Just
the
one
NFL
game?
year. Yeah, because I don't know if you guys saw the meme I put on the football channel. There was a person put a post because the Jets beat the Broncos that their parlay, they don't have no candy for the trick-or-treaters because their parlay didn't cash. And it'll be a cold day in the sports betting world if the Lions do knock somebody off because nobody's going to pick them the rest of the way. And if you're somebody who actually pays attention to this stuff, like you look at line movements, you look at odds, you actually care about futures, I think there's going to be more people taking that 450 to 600 for them not to win a game. Like I really think there are going to be people who are going to take that bet because they're terrible. I'm gonna be real with you. Like they are terrible. They're hard to watch. Jared Goff. I mean, they're going to have the number one pick in the draft this year, and God bless that. God bless the young man that is the number one pick in that draft class because he's going to have to deal with that. And I love, and I think the city of Detroit is on the come up. I think right now with the way culturally Detroit is getting a lot of traction in the hip hop world. Kay Cunningham,
he's been pretty bad.
Trending. Detroit is getting a little bit more hip. So, I hope they trend up, but I don't see.
You think is this a hot sports betting take? You think there's a correlation between the hipness of a city and the talent that they can acquire for their team?
Yeah, I do actually.
All right.
Yeah, there's definitely for free agency.
Yeah, I do.
Basketball.
I do.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Tampa Bay, the city of Tampa Bay is going to be, I think, in the next 5 years, we'll look at it how we look at like a Miami or like an Orlando, because the sports, at the end of the day, sports change an infrastructure of a city. I mean, LeBron James, when he left Cleveland, a lot of those businesses and local businesses that were banking on LeBron James games probably didn't make as much money that they usually did yearly because nobody was caring enough to go into the bar or go into the store because they weren't going to see the Cavs because they suck. I think right now in Tampa Bay, I mean, right now it's championship Bay. I mean, you had the Tampa Bay Lightning. They won two Stanley Cups. You got the Buccaneers, who are still one of the favorites to win the Super Bowl. So a lot of teams are starting to come. A lot of these professional teams being successful, it brings more. I think it does bring more free agents, and it does. Yeah. I think it clearly affects the trajectory of what a team goes in, depending on how trendy and how functioning your city is. I think in basketball, I think it's been proven in basketball 1,000 times. There's only 2 championship teams in basketball that I can think of in the NBA that really didn't have major superstars, but won championships. That was the Dallas Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki. And then you remember when the Detroit Pistons won with Chauncey Billups and company, Shea Wallace, Ben Wallace, all those boys. I mean, those were good teams, don't get me wrong, but there was nobody on that team where we look back and like they're top 15 all-time greats on any of those teams. So.
Yeah, Dirk's probably top 20.
Yeah, Dirk is about top 20. Dirk is about top 20. Chauncey in that team, there's nobody in that team that was a top 20 player.
Top 75.
What I get from this is I'm buying my NBA wins where I buy my real estate.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I agree with pretty much. Pretty much.
Well, couple points to go off of before we move on. First of all, there's also just to go back to reinvesting your bet rather than taking the future. You also have that added flexibility of, if something happens, right? I think you mentioned that they play the Cardinals, right, or something like that. Kyler Murray tears his ACL. I hope he doesn't. It's on my fantasy team, but if he does, you're gonna have a massive line movement that moves essentially, with the lines that have a better chance of winning. So this gives you added flexibility. Is either, you win or you bet on the other team, they win 3 games in a row, you could take your profits, and then there might be major line movement. You want to get out of the bet. If you're not in a future that's locking you up the entire time, then it gives you this added flexibility of either getting favorable line movement and maybe still making the bet, or just taking your profits and leaving. And one other thing that I think is always funny to think about, J-Rob, you mentioned, where do you find a win? I always think this is like interesting to think of it as like a free throw shooter. Mm-hmm. So even if you think like the Lions have like a 10% chance to win any of their games, just like an average around, it's probably a little better than that. I mean, just think of like Steph Curry taking a free throw, right? For Steph Curry to make 4 free throws in a row, he's about a 90% free throw shooter, only has a 65% chance, right? So even though the Lions shouldn't win any of these games on a percentage chance, it's, funny how probabilities work.
It's only 12%.
Only 12% chance.
Yeah.
It's weird to think of that way because of how bad they are, but really it would be very like kind of wild if it were to actually happen. It's just, I always think of it as a free throw shooter because you think of them as so automatic.
I mean, the probability of winning
10
games
in a row,
like
right? It's
19%, 14%, 31%, 31%, 19%, but
just an interesting thought experiment when you put it in something automatically.
Last point before we switch is, if there's a game that I think the Lions can take, disclaimer, it'll either be January 2nd against the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle, or it'll be January 9th against the Green Bay Packers in Detroit. And I'm going to tell you why. The Green Bay Packers, by the time it gets to January 9th, will probably have secured a spot in the playoffs. So that means that last game, the starter is probably going to be Jordan Love. And a lot of their big players that probably won't play that last game of the year because they'll have a bye week and they'll want their players to rest going into the postseason. So if there's any chance for the Lions to steal a game, I'm going to go either January 2nd and January 9th, because that's when teams are going to be secured and clinching playoff spots. If the Seahawks are still fighting for their life by January 2nd, they won't win that game. But this January 9th game, the way the Green Bay Packers look, I would give the Lions a not significant shot, just a small one, to steal a game January 9th against the Green Bay Packers, because the Green Bay Packers will not be playing with their starters.
Interesting. Yeah, unfortunately, you'll have to probably place that bet closer to January 9th.
Yeah, I know.
Dan and I were just talking about it, right? They don't show odds for the last game of the season.
Yeah, they usually don't. Interestingly, if you can find it and you believe that narrative, you should take it now.
For sure.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, cool on that topic. I guess in kind of summary, maybe it makes more sense when you look at these futures to reinvest rather than hold up your money for X amount of time to place a bet. Something to think about.
Right.
So next topic we want to go through is the change of rules in the NBA. So it's kind of a pretty hot topic right now. Refs are not allowing people to initiate contact as much, and it's impacting a whole lot of things in the NBA. But when it impacts a whole lot of things in the NBA, it impacts the betting market. So just a few stats before I kick it to Matt. Just interesting stuff over the course of the last few years. Points per game across the league last 6 years has gone up. Offensive efficiency, so number of points per 100 possessions, increased since 2014. All 10, this is crazy, of the top offensive ratings in NBA history have come in the past 3 seasons, and 7 were from last season alone. Mm-hmm. But this year, offensive rating, this is through around 7 games, down 6 points. Lowest marks since 2014. Points per game are down about 5. And that's with 3-point attempts and pace of play increasing. So essentially what this is saying is your high usage players, I got like a list here, your Bradley Beal, Jimmy Butler, Trae Young, LeBron James, you guys know the people I'm talking about, high usage, get to the foul line a lot. Their average free throws per game is down anywhere from about, I'm looking at 2 to 7%. Oh. So what does this mean? This means that if the betting markets were not expecting this, it sounds like a lot of things went under.
A lot of things did go under,
right?
Including James Harden flops. But First and foremost, 208 games in the season so far. 128 of those hit the under, and only 80 hit the over.
Wow.
So, just a fun exercise. If you were to bet $100 on every single game to hit the under so far in the NBA season, you would have made $3,600.
Wow.
Will
nice.
these markets catch on? Maybe. I'm very curious to see how this trends over the next week, 1 week, 2 weeks. But maybe they're slower than I think they will be. Maybe there will be an opportunity to continue to hit some unders for the next week.
Yeah. And Matt and I were talking about this quickly off camera. It's, how is also the potential overreaction? So, you start to bake in the fact that these players, they may start to adjust to the rule changes, like probably well, they're professional athletes.
Right.
And then what does the betting market do? It might take them a week to then catch up to the fact that based on that new totals that are being set lower. So you react to these new rule changes, the markets, the totals go a little bit lower. All of a sudden players start to adapt and you see a lot of overs. Interesting opportunity if you start to see some people adapt to it. So, it's kind of a wait and see. There's no total actionable advice, but it's very interesting that right now the unders are at a pretty unprecedented rate.
I mean, usually betting markets are pretty sharp. You never see something this drastic,
especially on a
almost
major
never.
market.
Yeah,
right?
especially on a
totals,
major market.
I mean, maybe you could see this on like a player prop, like someone with very high usage, like James Harden, his points have been down.
Yeah.
Maybe that would take a while for them to react to that, but on a major market like totals, it's very rare in 2021. I'll say
on a 50-50 bet, which is what totals are essentially 50% the over, 50% the under,
Right.
61.5% hit the under. I mean, that's just Vegas has never been more wrong.
If you're a 61.5% better on 50-50 bets, you are the best ever.
Yeah.
So you see a cow online saying he's 70%. He's probably lying. Yeah, J-Rob, I mean, love to hear your thoughts about what you think players will do to adjust this or what the rule change you think is done.
I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I do think the rule change was necessary because I was not the biggest fan of, I think it came to a point where guys weren't even looking to score anymore. They're just looking to how easily I can get into a foul. And realistically, I love James Harden as a player. I'll be honest. I think he's great. I think his game is great. One of the best offensive scorers of all time. I mean, if you put him in the top 10, he has to fit somewhere on that list.
Yeah, I agree.
Unfortunately, though, his game has definitely been also predicated around his ability to get to the free throw line. And that's been big in his game. And guys like Trae Young, Bradley Beal, Damian Lillard, and others, they've been also predicated their game about obviously their offensive prowess, but getting to the line and knocking down free throws. I think now with this rule change, players can't have this mindset of trying to draw a foul. You have to look to actually try to score, because when you look to score, you force the ref to call a foul. For example, LeBron James is shooting the most jump shots in his career. And I think in 2 games, I mean, he didn't shoot the ball very well. He sat for 2 games because of ankle soreness, but he shot 1 of 16 from 3-point range. I don't think in most cases, LeBron James is settling to take 16 threes in the span of 2 games. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, let's be real. He's the best driver of the basketball we've ever seen. There's nobody in NBA history, I think, can get to the rim at will better than LeBron James. So with that being said, even a guy like that is settling for jumpers, and I don't think that's the point. I don't think guys are supposed to be settling for jump shots. I think the mindset of the players has to change a bit. You can't think with this mindset of, I'm trying to get this foul call. I got to think I have to go score the basketball. If I go score and somebody swipes me over the arm, that's a foul. And if refs don't call that, you can review calls in the NBA now. And I will say this, I do think there might be an up. I don't know if there's like a direct number, but I definitely think the amount of reviewed calls is going to go significantly up this season than it did last season, because there won't be as many, the NBA is trying to get rid of the ticky-tack call. The hand check, because back in the 90s, you can hand check. Now you can't really touch anybody. And then, now one of the biggest moves you see is you pump fake, the defender jumps, and then the offensive player jumps into the defender. They try to get rid of that. And I understand getting rid of that because I think I think that shouldn't be a foul. Because if you have a place to land and somebody's jumping into you, I mean, I just don't think that's a foul personally.
No, I agree.
So I get what the NBA was trying to do, but I also feel like it almost got too lenient. Like, you're trying to play within this new rule change, but you're not allowing players the benefit of the doubt. Like some of these great scorers, regardless of how much they get to the free throw line, they are better scorers than majority of the league, and they still are getting fouled. Like players are still fouling them. So players have to change their mindset. I think that's the biggest adjustment. Change your mindset. Don't think I'm going to try to get a foul here. Think I got to go try to get a bucket. And if I force myself to go get this bucket, you got to foul me. I go to the free throw line. But I do still feel like the unders will still stand because there won't be as many free throw attempts.
Yeah, you're saying that, but in my head, I'm thinking that the markets might follow kind of a pendulum.
Yeah.
Because right now you have the situation where players haven't adjusted and lines haven't adjusted. You're seeing a lot of unders. Players might over-adjust, lines might over-adjust, and you actually might see overs based on that.
And basically, I mean, one promising thing is if pace of play is increasing and 3-point attempts are increasing, points will follow.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you have more shots and more of them are worth 3 instead of 2, it's probably going to increase.
Yeah.
And I think players will do what you're saying, J-Rob, which is you'll have an adjustment. And I think, look, good for really good basketball players for the past 4, 5, 6 years. It's like, hey, if I drive and I initiate contact, I go shoot a free throw. If I'm Steph Curry, I shoot 90%, Trey is like 89%, James Harden, 88%. That's worth it, right? I mean, that's worth doing. So what at that point you're at like what 1.78 points per possession, which is a lot higher than I imagine the NBA point per possession is probably hovering around 1. So it made a lot of sense for them to do that on average. So when you're a really good player, you will you'll adjust.
Yeah.
So I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think you'll see the market start to react. But I think a good thing for any bettor is what's the word I'm thinking of? Big movements in either direction, right? Just total
return to mean.
Yeah, just like a total, whether it's positive or negative volatility. Whether it's positive or negative volatility, that's good for a sports bettor because if you have an opinion, you can capitalize on it.
I will say this though, and this is just from a sports fan's perspective. This is about just from thinking from a fan of the game. Is there's definitely like this rule change. Players will have to adjust to this because if this becomes a thing where players are significantly playing worse, these are going to be legacy biters. Like people will be, I think when it's all said and done, we look at James Harden as what first ballot Hall of Famer easily, right? But if he can't adjust this rule change, people are going to look at the way he plays basketball a little bit different. Because then this is when the whole conversation of eras, can you play in this era versus that era? And people will be like, well, James Harden could only have played in this specific era in the 2010s because the rules were pretty much were the best for his skill set. But now when the rules change, he couldn't adjust with it. So I don't think that's going to happen because, I mean, I still think James Harden can score with the best of them and all the other guys, the Treys, the Brads, Currys. So, but that's just something to think about as a fan. Like, if you don't adjust to this, how are fan bases and people around the league and people who are fans of basketball looking at you as a player?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. My thoughts are that they'll adjust just fine. NBA wants to see offense and they'll find a way to get it. All right. So last up, we thought we'd talk about the Chiefs a little bit. Interesting story in the NFL right now. We're recording this right after they played the Giants. So I believe they're 4-4. Their season win total projection going into the year was about 12.5. If you're 4-4, that means you got to win the last 9 games to get to 13 and hit the over. So I thought it was interesting because, we did come across the fact that their strength of schedule is pretty tough the rest of the way. And you got some pretty unprecedented things happening in the sense of you have Patrick Mahomes, who had a pretty high trajectory to being, a first ballot Hall of Famer in many people's eyes. Myself, with the fact that through the first few weeks of the season, at least, they had a historically bad defense. In fact, on some analytics, the worst defense of all time through a few weeks. So it's an interesting win total projection in the league going into the year. So Matt ran some numbers about, just kind of the probability of them actually hitting that number. And I think they're pretty interesting.
They're still a favorite in every single game that they have going forward.
Really?
So, but the probability of them hitting every single game is only a 7% chance. So
Interesting how that works, right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. They're still a favorite in every.
Yeah, that Packers game that they have next week. I mean,
They're
this could
favorites
all
win
be
that
over
game.
next week.
They're favorites.
Yeah,
win that
which
game.
is, I mean, it's belief in the offense and Andy Reid and Pat Mahomes, and it's interesting because the Packers look very good, and by all accounts, Devontae Adams will be back. So I was a little surprised by that, but the betting markets are much less reactionary than the public. The public right now is like, the sky is falling.
To a sense,
Pat Mahomes
betting markets
throwing
reflect
so
the
many
public, but
interceptions. Well, for the most part, especially in a major sport, the most bet on sport in America, they tend to follow pretty sharp money. And when you follow pretty sharp money, they usually don't overreact to people or teams doing bad in primetime games. They tend to, the public goes crazy because talk shows go crazy, but bettors usually can kind of sift through it a little bit better than Twitter. Come to a reasonable
for
conclusion.
sure. Sure.
So you're telling me that's not where you get your picks?
Only in the past, not right now.
Only in the past.
Yeah.
I will say this about the Chiefs. So the rest of the way, they got the Packers, they got the Raiders, they got the Cowboys, Broncos, Raiders again, Chargers, and then the Steelers. So they pretty much got their division the rest of the way, and then they'll go against the Cowboys and the Packers, and then the Steelers to finish it off.
Yeah, that's pretty tough.
It's pretty tough. Oh, and then their final two games, the 9th and the 2nd, are the Bengals and the Broncos. So yeah, they got a tough. The rest of the way is going to be hard.
Bengals pretty good.
I think the Broncos, they should beat the Broncos. I mean, the Broncos got rid of their best defensive player of all time. I mean, I think Teddy Two Gloves is a good quarterback, but he's more of a stopgap for the guy you decide to bring in to be your franchise.
Yeah.
The biggest problem with the Chiefs, unfortunately, and I know Nick Wright right now is losing his mind. I don't know if you watched too many first things first, but he had predicted originally that the Chiefs were going to go undefeated, that they wouldn't lose a game, that they would go 20-0, win every game of the season, then win out for the postseason. He was dead wrong. Not only was he dead wrong, but the Chiefs, I don't know if you saw the clip, but they are last defensively in yards allowed, passing defense, all the major categories. The only reason I think they've been able to win them 4 games is when you play teams like the Giants, and then when you have Patrick Mahomes, who and Tyreek Hill and Andy Reid, you can always stay in it because you can always score points. But they can't steal a possession or two to save their life. And if you're not, every game is not going to be some sloppy team like the Giants. Like the Cowboys, as much as I hate to say it, because I think the most toxic fan base in the history of sports is the Dallas Cowboys. They have a good shot at this thing. The Packers have a good shot. The Raiders, post John Gruden, I think they even have a shot. I mean, I think they'll probably have to get. I really don't know, but I feel like they should have traded for Odell Beckham Jr., especially with the Henry Ruggs dilemma. They'll definitely look to pick somebody else up to replace him. So the Raiders will be a little bit better. They find a new deep threat. So I just can't see the Chiefs winning the rest of the way. I think it's very unlikely. And it's not because they can't do it based off the talent, but their defense isn't that great. Patrick Mahomes in 7 straight games has turned the ball over. He was plus 140 yesterday to throw a pick, and we had talked about it on Hot Start, and he goes ahead and he does it. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on in Kansas City. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I actually don't even think the Chiefs will make the playoffs. That might be a hot take.
That's definitely a hot take. They're only
that's a hot take
right now. Yeah,
that might be a hot take. I'm telling you, I'll agree. That's a hot take. But I know bad football when I see it. And I'm not saying the Chiefs are bad, but they are playing some sloppy football. It's not fun to watch. It's not the Chiefs we have known for 2 years. And unfortunately, I'm not one of some of these bandwagon Chief fans who have hopped off the wagon because of this 1 year. Because I mean, all the greats have had down years. That happens in sports. You're not going to be a 10-game winning team. You're every season of your career. Sometimes, unless you're Russell Wilson, who's has had a winning season for his entire career, he's one of 1,000 quarterbacks that have came after him. So and before him. So if the Chiefs don't make the playoffs, now they know that there's a lot of things that they need to deal with. I mean, they brought in Melvin Ingram in hopes to bolster their defense, but I can't see them winning the rest of the way. They have a really tough schedule the rest of the way. And I don't even think they get into the playoffs.
That's interesting. Betting markets disagree. I just looked it up. You can still stand by your decision, but they're minus 182 to make the playoffs.
And that's not as big as I thought it would be. That's actually pretty interesting.
Well, they are 4-4. What do you think they need to go to make playoff 10-6?
It's 17 games now. It's 17 games now. It's not
I think
16.
11-6. They have a very good division. I guess you think of the wild card. There's a good chance they can sneak in there. I will say, and this is, I gave kind of like the overview of the NBA last week, and I said, to win an NBA title, aside from one scenario, you essentially need a top 25 basketball player of all time.
Yep.
Well, football actually gets a little boring too. And this is, in my opinion, a pretty common thing. If you can make the other team's quarterback uncomfortable and you keep your quarterback comfortable, every great team ever essentially does that, bar there's been a few examples. And essentially, if you could pressure the quarterback, especially in the new era, this doesn't, predate like 80 or whatever, but if you could pressure another team and you keep your quarterback safe in the pocket, that's how you create a great team.
Yep.
And the Chiefs don't do that.
Right.
And really, if you sit down right now, and I'm not as well versed in NFL history as I am NBA, if you sit down and really think about, some recent teams, so you think of the Bucs last year, you think of the last Peyton Manning teams, those Russell Wilson teams with the Legion of Boom. I mean, you kind of go through it and you start to see this pattern, which is you get a lead and then you can have your defensive ends and your linebackers, people that are good at rushing the passer, you let them loose. And when you have a lead, and the other team has to throw, that's when that works really well. So you see a pretty common scenario. So I would say that the Chiefs make the playoffs, but I don't think they're a Super Bowl contender because of that. Now, if Melvin Ingram changes things, he might change things, but Frank Clark hasn't been very good. Chris Jones hasn't been very good this year. And until that turns around, they don't fit the meta of what an NFL Super Bowl team is at this current moment.
Can I see a live bet though right now between you and J-Rob?
You want to bet Mountain Dew like Skip and Shannon Sharp? Let's bet Mountain Dew.
Yeah,
we can bet Mountain Dew. I mean, it's a little unfair.
I'm willing to stand on this take about the Chiefs not making the play. I'll stand on it. I'll live with it. I'll stand. I'll 1,000% stand on it.
He'll be there to collect his Mountain Dew at the end of the season.
Yeah, I find it difficult to have one of the best quarterbacks, to me, talent-wise, of all time. Obviously, a great coach. They do have a lot of very talented pieces. I think they'll get in, but like I said, if you can't rush the passer, you probably can't win a Super Bowl. So I don't think they'll be a Super Bowl contender.
I don't think they'll get in for the simple fact that their division is tough. The Raiders look better without John Gruden than they did with him. Justin Herbert, depending on how you look at it, I don't think the gap between Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert is as significant as we think when it's going to be all said and done. It is. It's a gap. No, Patrick Mahomes is better. Don't get me wrong. There's a gap. But that kid in LA, he's going to catch up. And
he's good.
He's good. On top of that, this is a 17-game season. I can see them winning 10 games and not getting in. Like, that is going to happen to a few teams this year. They're going to have 10 wins, and it's not going to be enough because you have to win those games in your division. They have to go to Las Vegas. I don't think they'll win that game. They have to go to Chargers in December. I don't know if they win that game. So if they don't win these divisional games, that's where the biggest issue is, because it doesn't really matter you beat the Packers and the Cowboys and the Steelers at the end of the year. You need to win your divisional games. I don't think they're going to win their divisional games because, one, they can't rush the passer that well. Melvin Ingram's going to come in, but I don't think that's going to be enough. Two, the O-line, I don't think their O-line is that great. And if you look at last year's Super Bowl, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did not rush Patrick Mahomes or blitz him. You say you have mentioned, Dan, about letting your linebackers and ends cut loose. Yes, let them pin their ears back and go for the quarterback. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers played too high defense, cover two. Matt, I don't know if you know what cover two is, but if we have two high safeties, then your corners are playing the flats.
Thank you for explaining that for
No
our
problem.
users.
No problem. No problem. So
Yeah.
two that have two high safeties to guard Tariq Hill, and then they're just sending them. They literally teams are believing that their defensive line in their base defense, without calling the blitz, is better than the Chiefs' offensive line. So pretty much our 4 is better than your 5, and that's been the blueprint. And that's why they don't win. They've struggled because everybody is taking that Tampa Bay Buccaneers film and they're applying it to this season. And they have not really solved it. They've been the team that they probably should beat, but they're not solving. They haven't solved it. And I think when it starts to get to that nitty gritty, I love Patrick Mahomes. I think he's the most talented quarterback to ever play the game. He's not the greatest. He's not the best of all time. But in terms of just pure arm talent, best arm I've ever seen in the history of the game. I will give him that. But football is the ultimate team sport. Offense, defense, special teams, coaching. They have the quarterback. They don't have the line. They don't have the defense. They do have the coach, but that's not a full recipe for success. And I'll be taking the plus 180 or whatever it is for them not to make the playoffs because it won't happen. And I'm willing to stand on that. And
that seems like a pretty good place to leave it.
Yeah, you'll be taking that line. Dan will be taking his Mountain Dew. No.
Mic drop. Mic drop.
All right. Well, that's our show. Thanks, everyone.
All right, fellas. See ya.
Have a good one, guys.
All right.